Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this evening's special event, which marks the beginning of this very special week to celebrate the tercentenary of Adam Smith's birth. Before we begin tonight's lecture, I'm delighted to say that our speaker, Dr. Gita Gopinath, has agreed to receive an honorary degree from the University of Glasgow, hence why we're here dressed up like this. As a university, we bestow honorary doctorates from time to time to public figures of great distinction, and indeed in 1762 we bestowed an honorary doctorate on Adam Smith himself. In a moment I will ask my colleague Professor Graham Roy to read the oration for Dr. Gopinath, which sets out the motivation for this award, but without stealing Graham's thunder in any way, can I say just how pleased I am that Dr. Gopinath has agreed to receive this award from the University of Glasgow. As many of you know, I am an economist myself, and prior to my current role, part of my interest in economics was very much in those global institutions like the International Monetary Fund, which Dr. Gopinath represents. Those institutions were forged to provide global stability in the post-1945 era, but thanks to the work of its leaders like Dr. Gopinath, they have evolved to the more complex reality of the 21st century. And as an economist, I deeply believe that these international institutions are essential to help humankind deal with the major economic, social, and environmental challenges that we currently face. It's therefore a great pleasure that we're about to add one of those great institutional leaders to the ranks of our alumni this evening through the award of this honorary doctorate. So Graham, can I now invite you to come forward and read the oration for the honorary degree ceremony?
Vice-Chancellor, by the authority of Senate, I present to you this person on whom the Senate desires you to confer the honorary degree of Doctor of Letters, Gita Gopinath. It is fitting in the tercentenary of Adam Smith's birth that we recognise the achievements of one of today's finest economists and policymakers. Gita Gopinath's work has challenged conventional thinking, drawn insights from inside and outside of economics, and used evidence and rigour to improve the living standards of millions across the globe. Born in Calcutta, Gita was first a double graduate of the University of Delhi, before going on to complete an MA degree at the University of Washington and a PhD in economics at Princeton. She would subsequently hold academic positions at Chicago Booth and then at Harvard as John Vanstra Professor of International Studies and Economics. Her work at Harvard led Gita to be recognized as one of the foremost macroeconomists of her generation. To highlight just one of these contributions, her work in international finance has led to a rethinking of the challenges and risks that face low and middle income economies during crises. Standard macroeconomic models and policy frameworks had typically assumed that the prices of a country's exports were set in their own currency, with the exchange rate providing an important stabilisation tool. Gita's work evidenced that export prices, particularly in low and middle income countries, are however often set in so-called vehicle currencies such as the dollar. Trade transactions, particularly in manufacturing, end up being invoiced in dollars regardless of the countries involved. Now, at first glance, this might seem a rather benign operational issue, but it carries important implications. Firstly, trade balances, even in countries with independent currencies, end up being influenced by movements in the day-to-day value of the dollar. Secondly, and most importantly, in times of economic crisis, larger movements in domestic exchange rates can be needed to restore external trade balance, with knock-on costs for local employment and living standards. As we saw during COVID-19, a strengthening in the dollar, a typical reaction during times of uncertainty, can amplify the negative shock on low and middle income economies, thereby requiring quite a different global policy response than had been previously thought. As a result of her research leadership, Gita has held distinguished positions in academia, including co-director of the International Finance and Macroeconomics Programme at the National Bureau of Economic Research and co-editor of the American Economic Review. Her commitment to public service led Gita being appointed the International Monetary Fund, the agency of the UN tasked with supporting global economic and financial stability, chief economist in 2019. the first woman to hold this position in the fund's 75-year history. Just a few months later, Gita was leading the IMF's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Her work during this time has been widely commended. This included developing a roadmap for global economic policy that shaped the response of the international community and helping to establish working groups with vaccine manufacturers and policymakers to identify and then remove some of the trade barriers and supply bottlenecks that had delayed the delivery of vaccines to low-income countries. In December 2021, Gita was appointed first Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, the organisation's number 2 position. In this role, she's been a powerful advocate of the need for a better appreciation of the interdependencies across countries, not just in times of crisis. Regularly referred to as one of today's top global thinkers, in 2019, Gita received the Pravasi Bati Saman Award from the President of India, the highest honour conferred on overseas Indians by the government. Gita joins us in Glasgow to deliver one of the Adam Smith 300 Hunter Foundation lectures. Vice-Chancellor, I invite you to confer the honorary degree of Doctor of Letters on Gita Gopinath.
Can I ask you please to be upstanding? Well, good evening again, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be with you this evening for this special event. As I said, the legacy that Adam Smith left on the world is profound, not only as an economist, although he wouldn't have defined himself as such, but also as an important thinker of the Enlightenment and as a citizen who helped to shape so many of our ideals and systems in Scotland and across the world today. This week's Tercentenary programme will see scholars from across the globe come together to work with us to commemorate and evaluate this legacy, and we'll explore Adam Smith's role as an educator, as a scholar, and as a citizen. And we hope as many people as possible will join us and participate in the programme in the days ahead. But this evening, as I said a few minutes ago, let's begin with a lecture from one of the most influential economists with us today, Dr. Gita Gopinath. However, before we do so, I'd like to invite Sir Tom Hunter, who is one of Scotland's greatest entrepreneurs and philanthropists, to say a few remarks. Sir Tom founded the Hunter Foundation with his wife Marion, and they've done an exceptional amount of work in Scotland and across the world to advance charitable causes and support educational endeavours. And we've been very privileged here at the university to work with Sir Tom and the Hunter Foundation for a number of years. We are immensely grateful for the support the foundation has given to the Adam Smith at 300 programme and allowing us to bring Smith's work to life and share this work with audiences not only here in Glasgow and in Scotland but across the globe. So we'll first watch a brief video from the Hunter Foundation and then Sir Tom will come and say a few words.
Scotland, what does it mean to you? A nation that embraces optimism, where we reach for the stars. A nation where our success is boundless. Our ambition unbridled. A nation that invented the modern world, led it in philosophy, philanthropy, in medicine, that innovated while others watched in awe. And we did so much more. Scotland is where care for each other and love of opportunity go hand in hand. We've cultivated great achievers and achievements, artists, Olympians, world champions, global businesses, iconic actors, Oscar-winning musicians, innovators and entrepreneurs. Scotland has them all. A pantheon of all-time greats. Scotland has delivered ungodly technology, pioneered, cured diseases, and conducted a war on poverty, not on the poor. Opened horizons and minds to opportunity. As a small nation, we can, together, change the world and have done. Set our minds to unbelievable challenges and win. Think the unthinkable and win. Do the undoable and win. Think differently and think collectively. Drive change for all our citizens. Welcome all nations and nationalities to this, our wonderful country. Identify ourselves not by our politics, but by our ambition for our nation, for our businesses, for our families, and for our friends. Scotland can again lead the modern world. We need to be audacious, ambitious, and we need most of all to lift every glass ceiling that prevails for all of Scotland's children. The poverty ceiling, the education ceiling, the jobs and opportunity ceiling. We owe it to our ancestors, to our own legacy, and most of all to our children. As a nation, moonshot thinking should be our ethos. Leading the world, our mantra. Changing the world for the good, our ambition. Can we do it? Aye, we can.
I still get goosebumps, and I've saw it a few times now. So thank you very much to you and Hunter for pulling that together. We pulled it together when we invited President Obama to join us in Scotland a few years ago, and we had a wonderful night in Edinburgh. And I actually don't need to say too much more. The video really says it all. Scotland invented the modern world. Not my words, but the words of Professor Arthur Herman of Georgetown University. And he says, when we gaze out on a contemporary world shaped by technology, capitalism, and modern democracy, and struggle to find our place as individuals in it, we are, in effect, viewing the world as the Scots did. The Scottish Enlightenment is inseparable from its legacy. The age of Adam Smith, David Hume, James Watt, Robert Burns. When Glasgow, Aberdeen, and Edinburgh were the triple well springs of the modern mind, it's not just an episode in Scottish history. It marks a crucial turning point in America, in the development of the British Empire and of Europe, not to mention the rest of the UK. Oh, to be a fly on the wall as Adam Smith held court and brought the strata of civil society in Scotland together and educated the world. Wow. So what would Adam Smith think today if he looked in on our debate and the future of our great nation? Where are our big thinkers? Where are our disruptors? Where are our next great leaders? The pace of change in our world today is the quickest it has ever been, but it's the slowest it will ever be. Gita will educate us in this, I'm sure. Small nations could and should take advantage of this. Our size in Scotland makes us agile, fleet of foot, dynamic. Well, it should. But only if our leaders step up. We should be inspired and proud of our past, and especially Adam Smith. What an extraordinary legacy we have for our small nation. Why can't Scotland lead the world again? Enlightenment too. Why not us? The Hunter Foundation is delighted to partner with the University of Glasgow. Thank you, Anton, for the opportunity. We want to partner with the University of Glasgow to celebrate Adam Smith's legacy and his gift to the world. I'm very excited to hear what Gita has to say this evening and take inspiration from it. And who knows, nights like this don't happen too often in this wonderful hall, but there may be one of you out there, I hope there's many of you out there, who will listen, be inspired, and then act. Why not someone in Scotland, leading Scotland, and then leading the world? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that message of optimism for Scotland, which we do take to heart in the University of Glasgow. We're very proud to be a civic institution, one which seeks to exist to serve the needs of the communities around us, and we know that we have to be the engine of growth, the engine of innovation here in the city, but also in the partnership that we have across the globe. And I love the message in the video, which emphasized that it's not just about economic benefits, about societal benefit, because when while Smith died over 230 years ago, his beliefs that no society can truly flourish whilst there are large groups of citizens in poverty remain hugely important to us as a university. And one of the most important roles, of course, our university and institutions across the world can play is in advancing the potential for those key technologies that will drive growth and productivity, those technologies like quantum, medtech, fintech, AI, and indeed the challenge of how we evaluate, harness, and balance the power of technology like AI in an increasingly globalized world, which is what our keynote speaker will speak to us about in a moment. It's really exciting for us to hear Gita's take on the power and perils of the artificial hand, considering AI through the ideas of Adam Smith. I'm looking forward to that. AI is ever present across our institutions, both from our engineers to our medics who are using AI for precision medicine and cancer diagnosis and imaging, to our arts and humanities and social science colleagues who are researching the ethics of AI and understanding the applications to our future workforce. Now, I know that my colleague Graham Roy has already introduced our keynote speaker, but let me just, for those of you who entered after the honorary degree ceremony, let me just summarize briefly the CV of our speaker. Dr. Gita Gopinath is one of the most prominent economists in the world. As we've heard, she's served as the first Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund since 2022, having previously served as Chief Economist of the IMF. She was appointed to the World Bank International Monetary Fund High-Level Advisory Group on Sustainable and Inclusive Recovery and Growth in 2021. And Gita is a co-director at the National Bureau of Economic Research in the past. She's worked as an economic advisor to the Chief Minister of Kerala. So a long CV in her past, which she has contributed to in various ways. And prior, of course, as we heard, to her time in the IMF, Gita had a career as an academic at Harvard, the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and Princeton. Her alma mater, the University of Delhi, is also one of our institution's key partners to the Universitas 21 network, but as we heard, Gita also attended Princeton and the University of Washington. Gita has received a number of accolades in her career thus far, including the Financial Times in 2021 naming her as amongst the 25 most influential women of the year. And thank you, Gita, for agreeing to accept an honorary degree from us as well. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Gita. After the lecture, we will have a fireside discussion with prominent BBC journalist and broadcaster Kirsty Wark, and I'll introduce Kirsty after Gita's talk. But can I welcome you to the stage, Gita, to deliver your talk? We're looking forward to it.
Thank you, Professor Sir Muscatelli, for that kind introduction. And thank you to the University of Glasgow, not only for the incredible honor of this degree, but also for inviting me to participate in the celebration of Adam Smith and his legacy. Now, nowadays, it's almost impossible to talk about economics without invoking Adam Smith. We take for granted many of his concepts, such as the division of labor and the invisible hand. Yet, at the time when he was writing, these ideas went against the grain. He wasn't afraid to push boundaries and question established thinking. Smith grappled with how to advance well-being and prosperity at a time of great change. The Industrial Revolution was ushering in new technologies that would revolutionize the way of work, create winners and losers, and potentially transform society. But their impact wasn't yet clear. The Wealth of Nations, for example, was published the same year James Watt unveiled his steam engine. Today, we find ourselves at a similar inflection point, where a new technology, generative artificial intelligence, could change our lives in spectacular and possibly existential ways. It could even redefine what it means to be human. Now, given the parallels between Adam Smith's time and ours, I'd like to propose a thought experiment. If he were alive today, how would Adam Smith have responded to the emergence of this new artificial hand? To explore this question, I'd like to start with his most famous work, The Wealth of Nations. A seminal idea in this work is that the wealth of a nation is determined by the living standards of its people and can be raised by lifting productivity, that is, the amount of output produced per worker. This idea is especially relevant today because global productivity growth has been slowing for more than a decade, undermining the advancement of living standards. AI could certainly help reverse this trend. We could foresee a world in which it boosts economic growth and benefits workers. AI could raise productivity by automating certain cognitive tasks while giving rise to new, higher productivity tasks for humans to perform. With machines taking care of routine and repetitive tasks, humans could spend more time on what makes us unique, being creative innovators and problem solvers. Early evidence suggests AI could substantially raise productivity. A recent study examined how customer service agents worked with a conversational assistant that used generative artificial intelligence. The assistant monitored customer chats and gave agents suggestions for how to respond. The study found that productivity rose by 14% with the use of this technology. It's interesting to note that the greatest productivity impact was on newer and lower skilled workers. Why? The study suggests that AI can help spread the knowledge of more experienced productive workers. Imagine how productive a company could be if every employee performed at the level of its best employee. If such dynamics hold on a much more broader scale, the benefits could be vast. Goldman Sachs has forecast that AI could increase global output by 7%, or roughly $7 trillion over a decade. Now, that is more than the combined size of the economies of India and the United Kingdom. Now, it's far from certain that such sizable gains will be realized. It is still probably safe to say that when it comes to maximizing efficiency, Adam Smith would be wary of stifling the artificial hand of AI. Now, aside from the gains in productivity, AI could shake up the labor market in unprecedented ways. Recently, we have seen the loss of middle-skilled jobs due to automation, resulting in large clusters of high-paying and low-paying jobs at either pole of labor markets. The literature shows that AI could affect occupations and industries differently than previous waves of automation. Recent empirical studies suggest AI could reduce job market polarization by putting downward pressure on the wages of high-paying jobs. Some studies suggest that AI adoption could flatten the hierarchical structure of firms, increasing the number of workers in junior positions and decreasing the number in middle management and senior roles. The number of jobs affected could be sweeping. Some researchers estimate that 2/3 of US occupations could be vulnerable to some form of automation. So what will be the net impact on the job market? It is by no means guaranteed that AI will benefit humans or that the gains of the winners will be sufficient to compensate the losers. It's quite possible that AI might simply replace human jobs without creating new, more productive work for humans to move into, as the economist Daron Acemoglu has noted. Therefore, despite AI's potential, we need to consider the broad negative effect it could have on employment and the social upheaval that it could cause. Given that the well-being of the individual and the plight of the common worker underpinned much of Adam Smith's thinking, this would surely have troubled him. He was interested in developing an economy that worked for everyone, not simply a chosen few. Throughout the Wealth of Nations, he criticized the mercantilist trade system under which England sought to expand its exports at all costs, with too much market power being concentrated in the hands of companies that were granted trading monopolies. Today, the market for the components to develop AI tools is highly concentrated. A single company has a dominant position in the market for silicon chips that are best suited for AI applications, for example. Many AI models require massive computing power and huge amounts of data, the lifeblood through which these models hone their intelligence. Now, to be sure, open source programmers have shown an impressive ability to design their own AIs. But only a handful of large corporations may have the computing and data firepower to develop high-end models in the future. While Smith would have been impressed by the emergence of such a powerful technology in a globalized economy, he might also have realized that the invisible hand alone may not be enough to ensure broad benefits to society. In fact, in many areas, from finance to manufacturing, the invisible hand hasn't been enough to ensure broad benefits for quite some time. Which brings me to a point I'd like to emphasize. We urgently need sound, smart regulations that ensure AI is harnessed for the benefit of society. One of the challenges is the extent to which humans may come to depend on the judgment of AI systems. They rely on existing data, these systems rely on existing data, and hence may replicate the embedded bias in that data. Some models have shown a tendency to confidently defend false information, a phenomenon known as AI hallucination. If we cede control to AI in areas such as medicine and critical infrastructure, the risks could be severe and even existential. When it comes to AI, we need more than new rules. We need to recognize that this might be an entirely new game, and that will require an entirely new approach to public policy. New legislation proposed by the EU is an encouraging start. The EU's Artificial Intelligence Act classifies AI by risk levels. The highest risk systems would be banned. This would include government systems that rank people based on social compliance, something known as social scoring. The next highest risk level would be tightly regulated with requirements for transparency and human oversight. Now, beyond regulating AI systems directly, we must be prepared to address the broader effects of AI on our economies and societies. Given the threat of widespread job losses, it's critical for government to develop nimble social safety nets to help those whose jobs are displaced, and importantly, to reinvigorate labor market policies to help workers remain in the labor market. Taxation policies should also be carefully assessed to ensure tax systems don't favor indiscriminate substitution of labor. Making the right adjustments to the education system will also be critical. We need to prepare the next generation of workers to operate these new technologies and provide current employees with ongoing training. Demand for STEM specialists will likely grow. However, the value of a liberal arts education, which teaches students to ask the big questions facing humanity, and do so by drawing on many disciplines, may also increase. Clearly, we need international coordination on regulation because AI operates across borders. It's therefore encouraging to see that the G7 has formed a working group to study AI. In the end, we'll need a truly global set of rules. And considering how fast the technology is moving, time is of the essence. Now, all that said, to truly consider the implications of AI from Adam Smith's perspective, we need to go back to his first major work, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Smith explored what enables us to behave morally. In his view, it's our ability to experience sympathy. We can imagine each other's joy and pain, and as a result, we temper our passions and learn to be civil towards one another. It's what allows us to build and sustain a rules-based society. But what happens when you add artificial intelligence into this mix? Of course, AI has been a part of our lives for years. It completes our sentences when we are typing on our phones and recommends what video we should watch next. But what's remarkable about the latest wave of generative AI technology is its ability to comb vast amounts of knowledge and distill it into a convincing set of messages. AI doesn't just think and learn fast, it now speaks like us too. It's unclear whether AI will evolve to that point where it could be called truly sentient, but if it can already replicate human speech, it may be difficult to know the difference. The glue that binds the concept of society conceived by Smith, which is of sympathetic humans interacting in the spirit of compromise, that concept begins to disintegrate. This has deeply disturbed scholars such as Yuval Harari. Through its mastery of language, Harari argues, AI could form close relationships with people, using fake intimacy to influence our opinions and worldviews. That has the potential to destabilize societies. It may even undermine our basic understanding of human civilization, given that our cultural norms, from religion to nationhood, are based on accepted social narratives. It's telling that even the pioneers of AI technology are wary of the existential risks it poses. Just last week, more than 350 AI scientists, industry leaders, signed a statement calling for global priority to be placed on mitigating the risk of extinction from AI. In doing so, they put the risk on par with pandemics and nuclear wars. So much of Adam Smith's work is based on the idea of information being effectively transmitted through society. Markets send signals to prices to producers and consumers. Human beings pick up emotional cues from each other, enabling them to civilize their behavior. But AI can significantly damage the integrity of that information and the fundamental benefits that it confers on society. Smith would no doubt be troubled by the possibility of hallucinating software spreading fake news and deepening divides in society. Thus, there's a good chance he would have supported rules that protect consumer privacy and limit misinformation in the age of AI. To conclude, I'd like to stress that this debate is ongoing, and I certainly don't claim to have the answers. I've pointed out a few of the issues surrounding AI and how we can use Adam Smith's thinking and philosophy as a guide to help us navigate the path ahead. AI could be as disruptive as the Industrial Revolution was in Adam Smith's time. We will need to carefully balance support for innovation with regulatory oversight. Because of AI's unique ability to mimic human thinking, we will need to develop a unique set of rules and policies to make sure it benefits society. And those rules will need to be global. The advent of AI shows that multilateral cooperation is more important than ever. It's a challenge that will require us to break out of our own echo chambers and consider the broad interest of humanity. Adam Smith is best remembered for his contribution to economics, but his body of knowledge was much broader. He was a student of the law, history, rhetoric, languages, and mathematics. In the same spirit, harnessing AI for the good of humanity will require an interdisciplinary approach. Writing on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, Smith could hardly have foreseen the world we live in today, some 300 years after his birth. Now, we may once again be on the brink of technological transformations we can't foresee. For better or worse, humans aren't known for walking away from the next stage of scientific and technological progress. Usually, we simply muddle through. This time, as we confront the power and perils of the artificial hand, we need to summon every ounce of our empathy and ingenuity, the very things that make human intelligence so special. Thank you.
Well, what a fantastic way to kick off our Tercentenary weekend. Gita, thank you very much for that highly insightful lecture, exploring the impacts of technology and AI, potentially in labor and capital, but also looking at the moral issues. So now for the next portion this evening, I'm delighted to welcome Kirsty Wark. Kirsty has had a long-standing career at the BBC, starting in Radio Scotland, where she became a producer, and then she moved on to television, presenting The Late Show and Newsnight, as well as hosting her own interview program and launching a production company. She's covered some of the most important economic and geopolitical events over the years, from the great financial crisis and the Brexit referendum. And tonight, we're really pleased to welcome Kirsty to host this fireside discussion with Gita. Kirsty is also an honorary graduate of the university as well, so great to welcome you back. And in fact, she told us that were it not for her parents' meeting here at the university, she might not be here. They were married in the chapel, so great to welcome you back, Kirsty. And please do join Gita for the fireside chat.
Thank you very much indeed. And just to say that I'm going to talk to Gita for about 20 minutes, and then there are microphones in the hall. We very much welcome your contributions, and we also have contributions from wherever people are watching in the world. So I look forward to that. Gita, I want to talk more broadly about the IMF in a moment. Let's begin with AI. The headline in the Times on Saturday was, "Why AI may want to wipe us out and how we can stop it." And just yesterday, the anti-terror watchdog in the UK was warning about the impact of bad actors, particularly in vulnerable people, cajoled into doing potentially incredibly dangerous things. It's as if all of a sudden we are waking up to AI. Rishi Sunak says he wants the UK to be the centre of global regulation. The director of Cambridge University's Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence says there are hundreds and thousands of people in China who feel they're deeply in love with chatbots. Have you closed the stable door too late?
Thank you, Kirsty. That's a great question to kick off with. I think it is fair to say that the speed with which things have happened have certainly surprised many, including the technologists who work intimately with AI. And we had 350 top scientists and CEOs basically endorse a statement that said that we need to mitigate the risks to extinction from AI. Now that is a risk, and many of us can't imagine that, but it's among the risks that we see. I think what we need now is, of course, to move rapidly. Now, just to be clear, I think there's a huge amount of uncertainty about how exactly this technology will impact our lives. So in a sense, it's not obvious how we're going to go and regulate it. I suspect there's going to be experimentation involved. But to the extent that we've seen, the G7, for instance, set up a working group to look into AI, there is legislation in the EU that's on train. It tells me that there is movement that's happening. And I mean, for the first time, I think technologists moved very quickly to ask for regulation. So maybe if we can have an interdisciplinary approach, we could end up with in a safer place.
Yes, and Yoshua Bengio, who has described the Times as the godfather of AI, was the leading signature in that statement backed by 350 experts. That follows Geoffrey Hinton's resignation from Google because he wants to be able to speak about the dangers, upending the job market. What happens when the chat GTP becomes more intelligent than us? What happens when they take over? You talk about the need for global regulation. And at the moment, there is this idea, particularly between the US and the EU, that there's going to be some kind of standard. But that leaves out the bad actors or the potential bad actors. And you're talking about trying to get a global arrangement with China, with whom the West does not have the greatest relationship at the moment. And we need it to happen fast.
Without a doubt, this will require a global solution because, like you said, we could have bad actors in different parts of the world. AI doesn't respect borders. So we need to move on that front. Now, I do think that we can't wait necessarily for everybody to come to the table and move ahead on this. So this is very valuable that the EU and the US and the UK are all thinking about how to regulate. But the idea would be to keep it an open-ended process. So any country that wants to join and contribute to thinking on how to regulate can make this happen. I mean, as an example, if you take the example of climate, the Paris Agreement, despite all its flaws, was very helpful in providing a common framework for countries to think about how to mitigate the risks, mitigate climate change. And so in that sense, we would need something similar for this to work.
I mean, you talked about AI being the artificial hand in helping create the wealth of a nation. And you talked about the evidence from AI's greatest productivity impact was on newer and lower skilled workers, spreading the knowledge of more experienced productive workers. But surely the outcome of that is that the more experienced workers will eventually find themselves redundant.
This is one of the risks. Now, to be clear, every major technological transformation that we've had has come with huge disruptions to the labor market. And there's always tended to be the fear that we will end up with lots of people who don't have any productive work in the labor market. And for most of the time, this has not been the case. We have seen, if you look at—
But this is exponential, wouldn't you agree? And it's also about artificial intelligence, which is moving at such a pace. It's sort of a different order, isn't it?
I think yes, it's true. I think the amount of time it took for the previous technological transformations to happen and the impact on labor markets was much longer than what we're likely to have. We could have adjusted, right? So the question is, how quickly can we retrain? How quickly can we figure out, okay, maybe I'm the person who asks the smart questions as opposed to the person who's actually coding everything up.
And you talked about the Goldman Sachs forecast, and the forecast actually said, the research said, it could expose the equivalent of 300 million full-time jobs to automation, and analyzing the task content of over 900 occupations, the Goldman Sachs economists estimated that 2/3 of US occupations are exposed to some degree of automation, as you said. What will be the earning model for those who actually don't have jobs?
Again, I think while we should absolutely be worried about how all of this plays out, I just want to remind ourselves that in the past we have created new kinds of tasks, right? I mean, if you look at the jobs that people do now, 60% of the jobs that people are working on now didn't exist in 1940. So, but we could very well have new jobs being created. But you're right, the speed is much faster, and it's still uncertain about exactly how this is going to affect markets, which is why I think it's important for policies, macro policies, to ensure that people are not substituting just into capital away from labor just because capital taxes are much lower than labor taxes, right? So you don't want to incentivize substituting humans for machines. That's one thing. And the second is you will need to have a social safety net that ensures that those who are at least in the transition out of work get a livelihood.
And Adam Smith is also very interested in societal cohesion, and the ways you do that is you have interactions, you work together, you play together, you learn together. The thing is, whoever controls AI will be the ones who really benefit, won't they? I mean, so the people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos will be but minnows in this, because if you control the AI, you'll be the ones that control the world.
This is one of the concerns. I mean, if you look at digital markets, and we looked at that in a study we did in 2021, digital markets are already very concentrated. And you see kind of anti-competitive practices going on. Now we have a different possibility of different kind of market power, because we know that especially with these kinds of large learning models, you want to have large amounts of computing power, large amounts of data is what's required. Now that said, we're also seeing that there are some new open source models that help people with not that sophisticated machines or data to come up with their own AI machines. So again, I think, without a doubt, I think that the risks of concentration are high. When you look at
inputs, sorry to interrupt, but that's exactly what your position is on the IMF, is that you want to see this great global disparity changed. The danger is with AI is the global disparity becomes greater.
it's, and given that the amount of digital infrastructure we have, especially in lower income countries, is so far behind what we have in the developed world, that is a major risk.
I love this expression, AI hallucination. Here's a good bit of AI hallucination. It was in the New York Times at the weekend. There's a very experienced lawyer, 3 decades. His client had an injury in an airplane with a trolley banging into them. So basically what the lawyer did was he put into chat GPT that and looking for other examples, and came up, the defense, the civil case came up with loads and loads and loads of examples from ChatGPT. There was an example on an Indonesian airline in 1975, there was an example in America in 1989, etc., went into court, delivered this, and it was all complete hokum. There hadn't ever been a single incident before, but ChatGPT had come up with it. I mean, that is the terror, isn't it? That we end up believing things.
Yeah.
And where in a sense is the sense checker?
So I think,
I mean, I sound like a complete pessimist, sorry, but where is the sense checker to make sure what we do this verification at the BBC all the time, which is minor compared to what the kind of verification is going to have to be globally.
Yeah, no, I think it is important, first of all, if there's transparency that says that this particular judgment was made by a machine, given everything we know, that would give us some pause about using it and running with it. But I actually think, again, this is one of those technologies where we're very quickly identifying things that we want to ban. I mean, usually when you think of regulating technology, you're nervous about using the ban word because you're worried about it. But if you look at the legislation that the EU is considering, for instance, which is, rating outcomes by risks, and that seems like a very useful approach to go, there are some what they call high risk, very high risk activities. Something called social scoring, which is, looking at your online behavior and seeing whether you're socially compliant or not, that should be banned, right? So it's not a question of do we want to regulate, do we want to have human oversight, but we just want to ban it. And then there are other tasks you certainly don't want to ban, then you can have more transparency, more oversight. But I think we'd have to very quickly figure out that there are some things that we just don't want happening. And the example of what you gave is a good one.
The problem is that every country has to agree to that. Yeah, as you say, because we live in a globalized world, and if somebody in one country decides they don't want to ban it, then what's to stop us seeing it and being influenced by it? I suppose that's what I would say. You talk a lot about making adjustments to the education system being crucial here. The demand for STEM specialists will grow, but also the value of the liberal arts education, the thinkers, the doers, teaches students to think about big questions. In a sense, what you're describing is what Enlightenment Scots did. Because that was the difference that, Adam Smith saw that when he went from an Enlightenment education at school in Scotland and to Glasgow University to a much narrower offering at Cambridge. So what you're saying is actually what we need is another Enlightenment.
I think there are lots of schools around the world that provide very good liberal arts education, but I think you're right, there are many parts of the world where it's super specialized. And, the speciality is very valuable, but I think this particular technology gives you pause to think of whether, we really need to broaden.
So let's move on now to talk. We've got a few minutes left before I open it out to talk to you about the IMF. The IMF's biggest debtors, global outstanding debt owed to the IMF was $155 billion in March this year, because there was a number of recently agreed bailouts for ailing developing economies. Is the ceiling for IMF loans dependent on the inputs, or is there actually is there an endless pot, or is there a ceiling?
Well, what we like to say is that in terms of our overall capacity to lend, that number is at around $1 trillion. Mm-hmm. So I think we are safely below that upper limit at this time.
Because we had Bono saying that we had to actually forgive all the debt. Argentina is your biggest debtor. Sri Lanka is tiny in comparison, $3 billion. I went to Sri Lanka for a news night, and before you agreed the loan, you personally, probably not, but as they were making the reforms. But for example, would the IMF forgive a debt to somewhere like Sri Lanka, who demonstrated for all they were worth that they wanted to make political reforms and market reforms? Do you actively always consider forgiving debt?
Okay, so firstly, I think I want to just step back and recognize that debt is a problem for many countries in the world, including Sri Lanka. They have unsustainable debt levels. they need that debt to be restructured, and that's the process that they're in with their official bilateral creditors and with the private sector. Now, your question is, what about the IMF? Where do we fit in here? So the IMF comes in at a time when nobody else wants to lend money to the country, right? And so we are there as a lender of last resort. And it's not just that we're giving the country money, but we're working with the country to come up with a set of policies that will hopefully not bring the country back to a similar problem in the future. So given that that is our
like
role,
Argentina, which is just
there are many countries when we so given the role that we have, that we come in when nobody else is there, that requires a particular kind of a lending model, and our members, who are the ones, it's not, this is the money that's coming from different countries who put money into this pot to lend to their other member countries, expect to see this repaid. Now, just so you know, when we had the pandemic in 2020, to our poorest member countries, we provided debt service relief. That doesn't mean that we just postponed the amount of their debt servicing that they had to do, but we actually forgave it. So to the best of our ability, when we can do it, we do it.
And actually, China is involved in Sri Lanka as well. And I wonder, because China is also becoming the lender of last resort in the developing world, but it balks at the demands to write down loans. Is there a danger that with China's involvement, that it ends up deepening poverty in Africa and elsewhere?
So firstly, if you look at the amount of financing that countries, including on the African continent, need, those are very big numbers. Those are in multiple trillions of dollars, right? And therefore, it's not going to be enough for just one or two players to be in this market. And therefore, we encourage other countries that provide lending of this kind. That's welcome. It's good for their development. Now, of course, we encourage that it should be on a transparent basis, the terms of the contract and so on. Yeah. Transparency helps on that front. Now, China is working with other official creditors through the G20 Common Framework, which is a new institutional setup that's been put so that you can get all the private creditors, the official creditors together and provide kind of comprehensive debt relief to countries. So China is participating in that. We've had some progress with some countries like Chad. We have had financial assurances provided for Ghana and Zambia more recently. And they've also participated in Sri Lanka in terms of providing financial assurances. So I think progress is being made, but it is fair to say that the pace has been a bit slow. So one of the things that we are doing the IMF is doing along with the World Bank and India's G20 presidency is have what we call a global sovereign debt roundtable that brings together not only official creditors in the private sector, but also the debtor country in there. So we can end up with better, kind of faster resolutions.
One of the IMF's aims, obviously, is reducing global poverty. And in 2021, 90 million people were reckoned to be in poverty. And one of your big aims during the pandemic was tackling vaccine divergence. And you made some really huge breakthroughs on that. What worked and what didn't when you look back on that? Because this will inform us going forward.
Yep. So I think if you think of it as what lessons did we learn during that period that can apply to the new inflection point that we may be at in terms of AI. I think first was the fact that when the pandemic was going on, one of our key messages was that the pandemic is not over anywhere until it's over everywhere, just because of the ability of the virus to mutate and for new variants to come up. The same applies to AI, which is you're not going to get rid of bad actors in one part of the world unless you get rid of them in different parts of the world. And so that is absolutely critical. So that's the one parallel, which is why we need a global solution. Second, as we needed during the pandemic, we need the wealthier parts of the world to help the poorer parts of the world. And that's going to apply here too in this current environment, especially in terms of building up digital infrastructure. And a third point is, one of the things that we saw during the pandemic was there were people in the Ministry of Finance and there were people in health ministries that kind of worked in different orbits. So it took some time for that connection to happen so that you got the right policies being done. So I think, again, in addressing AI, we're also going to need very quickly to move to kind of multiple ministries approach to make sure you end up with the right solution.
So that will be like that would be like having some kind of template for any future crisis, and the way the IMF would actually approach that, because you learn so much, for example, with the vaccines.
I think it is, some parts of it are useful, the kind of the three that I mentioned, what come to mind, but there's also a whole lot here that's going to be different, and we're going to have to be more creative and innovative.
So, and the global north-south divide, the IMF's working to close, encompasses lots of fault lines. COP27 came up with this a dedicated loss and damage fund for poor nations struck by climate disaster. But now researchers are arguing that a similar fund should be created for biodiversity loss, on the basis that habitat loss, overexploitation, mining, deforestation, agriculture by wealthy nations impacts disproportionately poorer nations. So the example they gave is EU fleets overfishing in West Africa to feed the consumers of Europe. What do you think of that idea?
I think the broader sense that when you're talking about global public goods, that we need mechanisms of this kind is, I think, a good thing. Now, what's important is that we need to actually get this implemented and have results come from it. So we still don't have that from the Loss and Damage Fund for Climate. So that's still where we have
still
to
don't
make
have enough
progress.
money in the Loss and Damage Fund.
Yes, we have to address that. The 100 billion every year to be given to low-income countries, that's also not happened yet. So I think there is ambition and there are good ideas being put out there, but we need to move very quickly on actually, putting the money where the mouth is.
Now, before I open this up to the audience, just want to ask 2 or 3 more personal questions. Your upbringing in India was quite unusual. Do you think that contributed to the path you took? Talk about the way you were raised.
Yeah, no, I was telling Kirsty previously that I come from a community in India that was traditionally matriarchal, which meant that property went to women, and when you got married, you didn't leave the house. You actually continued to stay with your parents. So, I grew up in a family where the sense was that having a girl child was a very good thing, which was different from pretty much the rest of India, where it's a very patriarchal society. So that was a positive news, but I should also say that somehow these labels are not enough, because what I did notice was that while my parents kept telling me, we have a matriarchal society, I saw that men were certainly making a lot of the decisions that were more powerful in many cases. So, on the plus side, I think mentally it was good to grow up in a system where you were not, the child that you wish you were replaced with a boy. But at the same time, there are lots of other kinds of biases that exist against women.
In an interview, you recalled an international meeting in which you sat in your allocated place at the table, IMF person, the name in front. And then you were asked to move because someone thought it must have been a mistake. There was a woman in that seat. I mean, what actually happened? It seems such a ridiculous and terribly rude thing to have happened.
Yeah, no, that was kind of amusing because yes, I was sitting in the seat, and the protocol is you sit opposite the head of the other delegation, and so I was sitting in front, and one other person came in and said, "Well, I think you're sitting in the wrong seat." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, it's the chief economist who sits in the seat." And so for a second, I couldn't believe it, and I just said, "If it's okay with you, I'm the chief economist." And then the most amusing thing was the head of the other delegation comes in and sits down and says, "I really want to talk about how we're empowering women." So it was incredibly
it is incredible that it's the 21st century and we're still having conversations and incidents like this. And the fact that so many women are not able to fulfill their potential either because of the regime, as in Afghanistan, or just the way that women are generally regarded. In your purview as the IMF, if you're going to end global poverty, women's productivity is incredibly important, isn't it?
Oh yeah, this is so obvious that
I know
we don't have to say it. It's absolutely true. I mean, getting women's labor force participation, the effect on economic activity is tremendous. And the truth is that what you need to do in terms of policies is going to be very different. You mentioned Afghanistan, where it's terrible, right? You need even the lack of schooling is that basic human necessity the girls are being deprived of.
But you actually it strikes me in terms of social engineering, when you put your conditions on debt relief, your conditions on your loan, is there ever a way in which you say you need to diversify your workforce? In order for this country to thrive, you need to rethink the gender of the people that you're employing. You need to actually step up. So actually you can make huge change in that way.
Oh, I mean, the countries that usually come to us for loans, the female labor force participation is very poor. So it's not just about changing the workforce, it's just getting women into the workforce, right? And this is a point that we absolutely emphasize.
Brilliant. Let's take hands from the audience. I've got one hand over here. Can we get a mic here? One hand over here, the second mic. Is there anyone up the back? Why up the back with a third mic? Could you just announce yourself, please, before your question?
Hi, thank you so much, Kirsty, and thank you so much for the lecture, Dr. Gopinath. Junaid Ashraf from the Scottish Asian Business Chamber. Very insightful lecture. Just had a couple of thoughts and questions on it. On the aspect of innovation that takes place with artificial intelligence, I come to think about the aspect of when the printing press was created, and at the time, from my understanding, the Islamic world did not actually incorporate and were very dubious about it, not for decades, but for centuries. Even so, to the point that I'd read that I think it was the first printing press that ever made it to the Islamic world was actually on a ship sent by Napoleon to Egypt. So within that vein, looking at and thinking at regulation within the West, is there a potential that whilst we're regulating and stopping what is perhaps in a situation that is going to occur, which is artificial intelligence will be in every facet of our lives and in the workforce, that whilst the West regulates and China looks forward of pushing ahead, that we end up in a situation where the evolutions of artificial intelligence are actually realized in other places in the world at the detriment of Western democracies? And secondly, if there's a question, if we could do that, just on the aspect of innovative solutions creating innovative problems, then once again, innovative problems creating innovative solutions, I wanted to ask on your thoughts on perhaps the adoption of policies such as universal basic incomes within nations.
So on the first piece, it was actually true when the printing press came up. I mean, there was also this big concern about whether now misinformation could get spread. This was like the original form of the concern that, well, everybody can print stuff and share it, and then we could have the same problem. My sense is that I think given the risks and given the unknowns with this technology, I do get the sense that all countries in the world would want to think hard about what they allow and what they don't allow, just given the size of the risks and given the scale of the warnings that are coming up, right? So my hope is that this will be one area in which countries will manage to cooperate. The second question in terms of innovative solutions, what was it? Which was the innovative solution?
Universal basic income.
Yes, I mean, so countries have tried it, and the experience has been that, it is helpful to provide people with some basic level of income. But at the same time, there is a value put to being in a job and actually, feeling like you are contributing to society. So I don't think that in and of itself solves the problem. And secondly, if you want to do it at a big enough scale, most countries, in fact, I would say all countries don't have the fiscal space to do it, given the level of debt that exists. You can't really give generous unemployment benefits. I think, but more broadly, maybe we could be less cynical and think of how we can ensure our policies, and that's why I gave the example of tax policies, to make sure that AI is being used in a way that actually it's not about just displacing human workers, but about aiding them in their productivity.
Before I take the second in the room question, I'm going to take a web question from David Fancy Clark. If less human economic agents, how will the wealth of nations be shared to stop the increasing divergence of income of citizens? Without a global economy that's regulated by a single rules-based legal system, societies cannot become more equal. I'm not quite sure.
Well, I think we should recognize that over the last 5 to 6 decades, we've had one of the biggest reduction in global poverty that we have seen. So the whole integration of the global economy and globalization more generally has played a very important role in reducing the number of extreme poor in the world. So, this has involved technological development, this has involved integration, we don't have a common regulated setup. So I think we can still make that happen without having one setup.
Question from the second microphone, thank you.
Thank you, Gita. It's nice to see you here in Scotland, and congratulations on your honorary doctorate. My name's Matt Stewart. I'm just wondering, listening to all this stuff tonight about AI and things, do you think that tonight with the Adam Smith 300 years, do you think now's the time that we need a return to the moral values? Do we need a new renaissance, a new enlightenment that takes care of all of us? Virtues, morality, all of that stuff. Do you think that's really what we need?
I think most people in the world have felt like that's something we've always needed. I think we're in a time where we have a new technology that could disrupt it in ways that we have not grappled with in the past. So I think the idea of having another Enlightenment, like the Scottish Enlightenment at that time, I think is a great way for people to come together, decide whether there are some common ethical rules around which we govern AI. I mean, that would be a useful start globally. Yeah.
Before I go to the third microphone, I have another online question here from someone anonymous. Shall we see AI departments? It could actually be a chat.
Yes,
frankly. Shall we see AI departments cropping up in companies and government departments? It seems to impact corporate governance, IT, legal, and HR, as well as all those involved in production. AI departments in every company.
Well, I suspect there's going to be some, whether you call it a department or not, but everybody, and even at the IMF, when we are thinking about how to use this technology, we are thinking about how we can use it, for instance, to increase productivity, because its ability to distill information quickly while making sure that you don't have the hallucination or the embedded bias in it. It's affecting the way we live. It's affected the way I get information online. I think all of us are touched by it. And
anyone that's a consumer is. Anyone that's a consumer is. Yeah. The third microphone at the back, please.
Thank you for your speech. Thank you for drawing attention to AI safety in general. I think it's a very important issue. My question is that given the two types of AI safety, one being AI, the observed issue with AI hallucination, bias, misinformation, and labor force replacement, and the second type being the tail end risk of extinction or AI, AGI and that kind of thing. Can you provide some overview of how economics and economists have contributed to addressing the first problem and the second problem, which I feel has currently been dominated by more game and decision theorists. And I feel like as an economics student, it's not very motivated that my field can contribute to this kind of problem.
I think it's fair to say that there is so much about this technology that we are still trying to understand. And you're right, there is the first part, which is embedded bias, hallucinations, privacy issues, labor market issues, that even on those issues, by the way, especially on the first three, this is new ground, right? So for instance, when we think about regulation for industries, we think about antitrust, but that's about product markets and not about data. And it's usually there are kind of price signals that you look at, but that doesn't work over here. So it's a very different thing. So actually, I think there's a lot for us economists also to figure out just in that space. And then I'm going to leave it to the experts on about what the actual risks are from, to human existence and so on. But I think what's fair to say is that every day we learn, or maybe every hour we're learning something new.
Yeah, so we learn something new, but we get counted very quickly. There's a very famous and wonderful and sadly now dead Scottish novelist called Ian Banks, who wrote a whole series of novels which kind of predates this, which kind of warned of a lot of this, as so often happens with literature. And you think, wow, you know, we knew this was coming. We just didn't get ahead. We just didn't get ahead because we've now got one of the other godfathers of AI is saying he regrets the development. It's like when it runs away with you. How do we stop? We need lots of really clever people coming out of Glasgow University to stop it running away with us. Can we have other hands, please? Yes, can I have the woman in white, please? Not Wilkie Collins, but the woman in white here. Can I have another hand, the woman standing at the back, and another hand over here, a man with the white shirt on. And while you're getting the microphones to these people, keep your hand up till the microphone comes. I'm going to take another online question. That comes from Utkarsh Kala. How can we coexist with machines and AI that inherently lack human values?
So that's one of the questions that I asked myself when I was thinking about what to put in my speech. And that's why I went back to reading The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is kind of the question was when Adam Smith wrote that book, he was talking in a world where humans interact with other humans. But what happens now you're in a world where you're interacting with machines? Now, so far, of course, as machines are building off data that humans have produced, which is why it sounds so human-like. And the question is whether it will become sentient or whether risk to human existence. So all those are very valid questions, and I've heard technologists on both ends of the spectrum about saying whether that's actually a real thing or this is total fantasy. I think that setting aside the question of whether it would be sentient or not, or whether there was a risk to a human existence, I think there are immediate challenges that we talked about that need to be addressed. And that's why I talked about labor market policies to ensure that you actually have the right kind of training, policies to ensure that they're not substituting indiscriminately away from humans just because your tax codes allow that. We've done it. I mean, we've lived in the past with machines and we've had a huge improvement in living standards because of that. So this also offers the possibility of big increases, but I think by far there is a lot of disagreement and there's a lot of uncertainty here.
So we can take microphone one, please, your question, and identify yourself, please.
Hi, Gita. I'm Rakshri. I'm from India, and I've studied here at Glasgow University. So I've just returned from a trip from India for 2 months. And as a common person in India, what I've been totally frustrated about is the automation of customer service. That too, having an enterprise here at the Glasgow, which is actually endorsed by the university's enterprise team, where my own enterprise aims to use AI and machine learning in order to consolidate the stakeholders, the fragmented stakeholders of the independent film industry here. As a common person, I'm totally thoughtful about how customer service has taken a hit. In line with that, my question to you is, are you thoughtful that the customer service has taken a major hit with aggregators such as Uber and others automating their customer service process, where it is becoming increasingly difficult and frustrating for a person to talk to a real human, especially for people of rural areas of developing countries? Isn't this a way for MNCs to discourage their customers to report and follow up with their complaints? Thanks.
This is an interesting question. So the example I actually gave in my speech, which is a very nicely done study, is about customer service. And it's about a customer service representative talking to a human, another human, but using a chat assistant which uses AI. And that chat assistant is trained on previous kinds of chats that have happened. And what the study found was actually that there was a 14% increase in productivity in terms of consumer satisfaction that went up, right? So there are examples of that kind too. But you're right, I think, your question is, to answer it specifically, you were talking not just about the average person in say, Scotland, but you were talking about in India, and you said in rural India, right? I think you're right, that if this technology comes starts getting used by people who don't have the training to deal with or the wherewithal to question whether this is a machine giving you this information, this is the kind of risks that we have to worry about. Every government is going to have to think about how to regulate, to tailor it to its population.
I mean, one area in which actually there was an example where automation and machine learning had impacted in a brilliant way in terms of games, for example, was when Kasparov, I think he was beaten by Deep Blue in the computer, and everybody started playing chess. There was a huge uptake in the amount of people playing chess because they were just so engaged in this. So there's one small hope for mankind. I'm going to take a question online before I come to microphone 2, and it's from Shama Bernard. What can we do to ensure that the increase in AI and its resultant pressure on jobs and employment do not lead to greater gender pay gap and gender imbalance in the workforce?
Okay. So firstly, and given, Kirsty, how pessimistic you are, I want to start with something positive, which is if I look around the world in most countries, including in Scotland, you have one of the tightest labor markets ever. Everybody who wants a job gets a job. Unemployment rates are at record lows, right? So just to put things in context, because I'm a little worried we're getting into the space of all of us are without jobs. The truth is, with all the automation that's happened so far, labor markets in many countries of the world, like I said, including Scotland, very tight. So in fact, the issue we economists are actually thinking about is, and worried about, as aging demographics, declining productivity growth, and the fact that we will not have enough
Kids.
Humans and, and enough of a labor force. So I think that this is where we are, and we've had a ton of technological innovation. So I just wanted to put that as a backdrop because, yes, we have to be very concerned. For me, the bigger questions, as of now, is that we've learned a lot from past technological revolutions about things we did not do right. Let me give you an example. An example, for instance, is when it came to automation and car manufacturing. For instance, in the US, and in several other countries, because of automation, you basically had a hollowing out of the middle class, workers who were working in this particular sector, right? Now, the assumption was, as economists, the assumption was that you don't need special government policy because workers will go to where the jobs are, where the new jobs are. They will go to new occupations, they will go to new regions. One of the deep frustrations that came after the great financial crisis and that led to all of the social unrest and everything that we saw was because that doesn't happen. No. It's not, the markets are not that fluid, labor markets don't adjust so much, right? So I think we should use that understanding to make sure that this time around the same mistakes don't happen. Now, again, things are moving very rapidly, so we don't know. But I just want to again remind everybody that we live at a time where lots of people have jobs.
Lots of people have jobs. Microphone 2, I think it was up at the back. Yes, thank you. Could you just say?
Thank you. My name is Latif. I am a PhD student from the University of Strathclyde. My question is on the implication of AI for STEM and non-STEM jobs on skills. Now we are talking about the demand for STEM, and if Adam Smith was to be alive today, I know he will be classified as a non-STEM person. So what happened to people in non-STEM? And in terms of even the divide, global South and global North, we don't have enough STEM jobs and the skills we are talking about in the global South. So how do we want to bridge this gap? And secondly and lastly, going back to the issue of morality, the world has evolved a lot in terms of what we tag as moral. So if we are going to go by the moral lens in addressing some of the AI challenge, what do we define as morality? And who is the police? Who measure morality in this context? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. There's so many great questions here that we could be
We'll just have a lock-in, it'd be fine.
We could be discussing this for a while.
Well, we've actually only got 5 minutes.
Okay. I think the first thing is, I'm going to, given this is celebrating Adam Smith, I do think that prices send signals. So in terms of if you're in a country with a deep shortage of STEM laborers, then I think the fact that those people make higher wages is a good signaling device to get people into that sector. That can change in other countries where maybe there's a lot of STEM and we need more of a liberal arts education, and that's what gets compensated. So I think I do believe still the markets have a signaling role. It doesn't work perfectly, which is why I talked about the policies that's needed. Now, that said, I think in terms of the bigger questions of morality and so on, I'm getting way out of my comfort zone over here. And you have to get that's why I keep saying that this should be an interdisciplinary approach, and I would rather have people.
Well, I mean, for Adam Smith, it was education was more important than religion. I mean, education gave people a moral compass as well.
I mean, I think I would endorse that statement.
Final question from the third microphone, which I think is in this territory over here.
Hello.
Would you like to stand up so I can just see you? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joan. I'm a second-year econ student at Glasgow University. I'm pleased to be here with you tonight. And my question is, how does the FMI help developing countries with debt relief? As if those countries can ask debt relief indefinitely, or is there a way the FMI help those countries avoid that situation? And another question would be, should we start questioning the system that led those developing countries to that situation while it benefits the West as well?
I think when you think of countries and you look at especially low-income countries that have very high levels of debt, and some of which they're unlikely to be able to repay, which is why their debt needs to be restructured. What the IMF does is, first of all, when we go in to help a country, before we give the country money, we think it's critical that their debt is brought down to a sustainable level through restructuring with other creditors. And the reason we want that is because so that it's not just that we give money and that money gets paid out to the creditor, so it just literally comes into the country and leaves the country, right? We don't want that to happen. So we work with country authorities to help them, have a debt restructuring process that delivers the outcomes that they want. Now, they're, of course, in the vanguard. They're in the driver's seat in terms of deciding what the perimeters are of restructuring and so on. But we provide, guidance in the sense that our assessment of what we think is a sustainable level of debt for the country comes from us. We provide what's called, to tell you, okay, what should you be bringing your debt to GDP level down to? That is kind of the technical analysis that we give. We also work with their creditor countries to help come up, so that we have a convening role so that we can actually get them to come and help the countries with providing debt relief. Now, there is, of course, yes, the very good question that, history is full of examples of countries that have debt restructuring, then they return back and they still come up with high levels of debt, right? Some of it, of course, is bad luck. If you've had a pandemic and you're an oil importer and energy prices have shot through the roof, that is just bad luck, and that is something that you could not have avoided completely. But one of our engagements with a lot of low-income countries is what we call, capacity development, which is helping the country have a good tax system, making sure the amount of taxes being raised to GDP, which tends to be very low in these countries, is increased so that they can rely on their own internal finances also to do the necessary investments.
Ladies and gentlemen who didn't get a chance to have your question answered, I'm sorry, online and also in the hall, but to all of you who came, and obviously to Gita most of all, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kirsty. And it only remains for me to add a few words of thanks. Above all, thank you, Gita, for being with us this evening and leaving us with some really thought-provoking themes. Whether it's expressions like AI hallucination or digital mercantilism, I'm sure we'll come back many times to what you've been telling us this evening. Can I thank you, Kirsty, for so expertly managing the Q&A session? Can I thank Sir Tom Hunter and the Hunter Foundation for their contribution to the evening and their support. I hope this evening has been a flavour of what's to come this week, and I hope many of you will engage in Smith 300 for the rest of the week, and indeed the many other events that we hold across the globe. Now, this programme and this evening's event have been organised by a number of colleagues in the university. There are too many to name this evening, but can I thank them personally for all the work that they've done. And finally, all that's left for me to do is to thank you, our audience, for coming this evening. There's now going to be a drinks reception in the Kelvin Gallery, and you're all warmly invited to that. And I hope to see many of you in the university in the days ahead. Thank you.